I never thought I would feel this lonely while sharing a home with two men. On the outside, everything about my life looked perfect. A charming house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a hard, working husband who provided for me without fail, and a steady rhythm to my days. But perfection has a way of feeling hollow when no one looks at you the way you long to be seen. For years now, my husband has buried himself in his work. He leaves early in the morning, returns late at night, and carries the exhaustion of the office straight into our bedroom. Even when he's home, his presence feels muted, as though his heart never actually makes it through the front door. I tell myself he loves me, but lately, it feels more like habit than affection. When his son, my stepson, moved in after his mother passed away, I didn't expect him to change anything. At first, he was quiet and polite, keeping mostly to himself as he adjusted to this house that wasn't quite his yet. But over time, I began to notice things about him, things I never meant to notice. He's only in his early 20s, but he carries himself with a kind of confidence I rarely see in men twice his age. Broad-shouldered, tall, with a presence that seems to fill every doorway he walks through. His voice is deep and calm, and his eyes sometimes linger on me just a little too long, though he never says anything inappropriate. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the strange dynamic of sharing a home with someone who wasn't really my son. And yet, every time his gaze met mine, I felt my cheeks warm. Every time he passed me in the hallway, I became acutely aware of his closeness, of the way he smelled faintly of soap and something darker, something masculine and impossible to ignore. At night, when the house fell silent, I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear his footsteps sometimes, faint but distinct, as he moved around his room or headed to the kitchen for water. Once, I thought I heard him stop outside my bedroom door. The thought both terrified and thrilled me, though I stayed perfectly still, feigning sleep, my heart hammering in my chest. I kept telling myself I was overthinking, that this was nothing but a phase of loneliness clouding my judgment. But deep down, a quiet voice kept whispering that something between us had already shifted. That night, as I closed my eyes and listened to the faint sound of his footsteps again, I couldn't help but wonder, was it just me who felt this tension? Or was he standing on the other side of the door, thinking the exact same thing? The night air was thick with stillness, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Outside, rain tapped faintly against the windows, a soft, steady rhythm that only seemed to underline my restlessness. My husband was away on another business trip, leaving the house quieter than usual, and my bed colder than I cared to admit. I lay awake, staring at the faint shadows on the ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts were too loud, circling back to the same unsettling truth I couldn't name aloud, the way my stepson had started to occupy my mind more than he should. And then I heard it, the faintest creak of the floorboards just outside my bedroom door. My breath caught, and I froze, every muscle tense as I strained to listen. Another step, then another. The door handle turned. Slowly. I propped myself up on my elbows, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. The door opened just wide enough for him to slip through, and then it clicked shut behind him. He stood there for a moment in the darkness, his silhouette tall and broad against the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and even from across the room, I could see the way his chest rose and fell with quiet determination. I wanted to speak, to tell him to leave, but no words would come. My throat was dry, my voice buried somewhere beneath the thudding of my own pulse. He took a step closer, and then another. When he reached the edge of the bed, he crouched slightly, his dark eyes meeting mine in the dim light. There was no trace of hesitation in his gaze, only something intense, something I didn't dare name. He reached for my hand where it rested on the blanket. His fingers were warm, steady, and I felt an unexpected shiver run up my spine at the touch. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, though I could barely manage even that. For a long moment, we just stayed like that, his fingers lightly brushing over mine, my breath shallow and uneven. And then he leaned in closer, his presence enveloping me in a way that was both terrifying and intoxicating. I knew in that moment I should stop him, that letting him cross this line would change everything. But as his lips hovered just inches from mine, and his hand moved to rest on my cheek, I found I didn't want to stop him at all. The silence in the room seemed to crack, like glass under pressure. And as his lips finally met mine, I felt the last of my resolve slip away. The morning light streamed through the curtains as though nothing had changed, but everything had. I sat at the edge of the bed, still in the same nightgown, staring down at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. My heart still carried the memory of last night, his warmth, his weight beside me, the way he had looked at me like I was someone worth wanting. But with the daylight came reality and guilt. I avoided my reflection as I slipped into my robe and quietly opened the door. The house was already awake. I could hear the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. My stomach tightened. I almost wished he wasn't there so I wouldn't have to face him. But he was. He stood at the counter, pouring himself a glass of juice, looking every bit as calm and unbothered as ever. His shirt clung loosely to his frame, his hair slightly damp from a shower. When he turned to glance at me, there it was again, that faint, knowing smirk, like we shared a secret nobody else in the world could guess. I looked away. "Good morning," he said casually, as though he'd simply passed me in the hallway and not crossed every unspoken line we'd drawn until now. I murmured a weak greeting and busied myself with the kettle, though my hands trembled slightly as I worked. Every glance at him brought a flood of memories I didn't want. The way his lips had found mine, the sound of his voice in the dark, the way I hadn't stopped him. And worse still, the way I hadn't wanted to. Later that day, my husband returned home. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway made my chest tighten. When he walked through the door, he kissed my cheek out of habit and asked about dinner as though nothing was amiss. I nodded and smiled in all the right ways, but inside I felt like an imposter, wearing someone else's skin. All through dinner, I felt his eyes on me, his eyes, not my husband's. Every subtle brush of his shoulder against mine as he passed behind me, every quiet moment when no one else was looking, he managed to remind me of what we'd done. And as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me still thrilled at the memory. Later that night, I found myself standing outside his bedroom door, my hand hovering just above the handle. My heart pounded. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open it or walk away forever. That was the cruelest part of betrayal. It wasn't just about what you'd done. It was about what you couldn't stop wanting. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the soft hum of the ceiling fan the only sound in the quiet house. My husband had gone to bed hours ago, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just a few steps away. I sat by the window, staring at the faint glow of streetlights outside, and wondered how long I could keep pretending this life was still mine. Every part of me felt heavier now. Every glance, every word, every lie I'd told by omission. I thought betrayal would come with a sense of thrill, but the longer it lingered, the more it felt like a chain around my neck. Behind me, the door creaked. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. I heard his footsteps cross the room, slow and deliberate, until he stood just behind me. The faint scent of his cologne curled into the air between us. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice the same calm, confident murmur that had undone me once before. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, though I could feel his presence, warm and close. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he continued. "Not since that night." Those words cut through me, sharp and deep, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. I felt them too. But I also knew I couldn't keep letting this happen. I stood slowly and turned to face him. His eyes searched mine, expecting permission, expecting me to fall into his arms again. But this time, I didn't. Instead, I took a step back. "We can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't." For the first time, his confidence faltered. He frowned, confused, maybe even hurt. "Why?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of my words before I spoke them. "Because this, whatever this is, it's not love," I said. "It's loneliness. It's weakness." And if I keep choosing it, I'll lose myself completely. The room fell silent except for the faint hiss of the fan above. He stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded, stepping back toward the door. "If that's what you want," he murmured, before slipping quietly out of the room. I stood there for a long time after, staring at the door, my heart aching in a way I couldn't quite name. I knew the guilt would never fully leave me. I knew I'd always remember the way he made me feel. Wanted, seen, alive. But some betrayals you have to walk away from, even if they're the ones you'll never forget. And as I finally lay back down in bed beside my sleeping husband, I whispered to myself,